Good evening and welcome. I'm Terry Sanchez, Program Specialist here at the Newport Beach Public Library, and it is my privilege to welcome you here tonight. I want to make sure that I thank the Friends of the Library for their generous support in supporting author events like tonight's. Before I introduce our author this evening, please take a listen.
A listener note: this story contains adult content and language.
There are a total of 13 stab wounds which have penetrated the body. They are all arbitrarily numbered from 1 to 13. There are 8 wounds noted in the left side and upper back in the shoulder and scapular area, where wound number 1 is on the top of the left shoulder.
I'm sitting in the office of a man who prosecutes murders for a living. His name is Matt Murphy. He's a veteran assistant district attorney who handles homicides out of Newport Beach, California. If you're from somewhere else and have a mental picture of Orange County, about an hour south of LA, Newport Beach is probably part of that image. It's the side of the county that the tourist guides want you to see. Pacific Coast Highway runs through it, luxury shopping, piers and surf shops and plastic surgeons, yachts and cliffside mansions. I used to cover the city as a crime reporter for a local newspaper. There weren't a lot of murders. Maybe 1 a year, 2 or 3 in a very bad year. Greed or lust figured prominently in the most memorable ones. These days, if you're one of the rare people who meet a violent death in Newport Beach, Matt Murphy is the prosecutor who will hear about it. The homicide case that landed on his desk in the summer of 2016 was particularly violent, and it was unique in his experience.
Number 5 is on the left, more to the upper arm area. Numbers 6, 7, and 8 are close to the midline region of the upper back. All of these stab wounds are superficial wounds. They have all been sutured by metallic staple sutures.
Murphy is reading the autopsy report, which is part of how he assesses whether there's a prosecutable offense. A homicide is the killing of one human being by another. He had to decide whether it was a crime.
Wound number 13, which is the fatal wound, is the upper left eyelid, 1 centimeter in size. Only wound number 9 has some bruising around it, and another bruise noted around 12 and 13. So when you review something like this, what it tells you is this young woman fought like hell.
Well, we are so very excited to welcome our guest author this evening. Some of you may know this event has been 2 years in the making. We originally scheduled Mr. Goffard for May of 2020, and that his program, along with several others, were canceled due to the pandemic. So we were absolutely thrilled when he agreed to reschedule with us. Christopher Goffard is a Los Angeles Times staff writer. He has authored 3 books. His novel Snitch Jacket was a finalist for the Edgar Allan Poe Award for Best First Novel. And his book, You Will See Fire, A Search for Justice in Kenya, was published in 2011 and received much acclaim. His true crime podcast, Dirty John, which is the basis for the book that we are highlighting tonight, reached an astounding 10 million downloads within the first 6 weeks of its debut. Which, if you don't know, if you're familiar with podcasts, a podcast is considered successful if it receives 50,000 downloads within the first 30 days. So that tells you how incredible that is. When the podcast was developed into a TV series, it became one of Bravo Network's most successful shows ever, breaking records for the network. We're so excited to hear about Dirty John, as well as a few other stories that he's been working on. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Christopher Goffard. Is that me or you? Can you all hear me?
Okay.
Can you hear him? Thank you, Christopher, for being here tonight. This has just been something we've been looking forward to for so long. Let's get right into it.
I'm glad we could do this. We were delayed but not derailed.
Yes, thank you. I appreciate that. So let's talk about Dirty John. That was an intense opener. Give us, I'm sure we all know the story, but give us just a couple sentences of just a brief synopsis.
Yeah, well, we found out about it because of the unusual death of John Meehan, who was dead before I ever knew his name. I mean, it's been long enough, I may as well tell you the ending for those of you who don't know where it goes. He's stabbed to death on the rooftop parking garage of the Coronados, not far from here. And Hannah Fry broke the story for the Daily Pilot. She's now at the LA Times. The police department actually did not go out of its way to inform us about this incident. In fact, I have a recording of an Orange County Register reporter calling the police dispatcher that day and saying, "Hey, is anything going on?" And being told, "No, nothing happened." So it turns out this guy, John Meehan, had been terrorizing people for years and years. He'd been insinuating his way into women's lives, extorting them, stalking them, and he'd been going from place to place, in and out of jail, in and out of prison. And our story really begins when he meets Deborah Newell, who's an interior designer here in Newport Beach, or was at the time.
And they met on an online dating site?
Yeah, on an over 50 dating site, and he seems too good to be true. He's at least on one level. There are gaps in his story, but he has a lot of skill with covering up the flaws in his story. He says he's an anesthesiologist, just back from Iraq, where he's worked with Doctors Without Borders. He goes everywhere in these kind of frayed hospital scrubs. And he doesn't have anything. He says it was stolen when I was gone. Now, Deborah's daughters are immediately suspicious of him, particularly one of them, who looks at his fingernails, sees that there's dirt under them. This doesn't seem like a doctor to her. She looks at his pants and sees that his cuffs are frayed around the heels. This seems a little suspicious to her. And eventually she puts a tracker on his car to try and follow where he's going all day. And it culminates in this scene where he goes after the other daughter on the rooftop.
That's incredible. It's so scary.
Yeah.
Almost unbelievable. Tell us, what was it like to interview Deborah Newell?
I mean, it was still pretty raw for her. She's still trying to process all of this. And I think she saw it as a way to maybe help some people. And it did strike a responsive chord, I think. I mean, I'm still getting emails from people who say something like this is happening to me right now. I'm getting emails from all over the world, from Brazil, from Sweden. I think what this story is really about is domestic abuse, and a subset of domestic abuse, which is called coercive control, which I hadn't known a lot about before I started this. And it involves not necessarily physical violence, but psychological violence and tactics like isolation, intimidation, micro-regulation of a partner's every behavior. These are people who will install like keystroke loggers on your computer so they can monitor you. They'll throw coffee on your suit just before a job interview to sabotage you. Things like that. And this guy, John Meehan, used a lot of these tactics. And it's kind of amazing.
I'm curious, when you get emails from people that are telling you that this is happening now, do you feel a responsibility to, I don't know?
Yeah, I try and direct them
to
I try and direct them to resources if I can. Yeah, I try to.
Yeah.
But what I can do is limited. But I think, I hope it's a public service in the end, Dirty John. It exposes the playbook of a guy like John Meehan. I think it lays bare the wiles and the stratagems of an extremely manipulative guy like that. So, I mean, someone asked me, will your series maybe inspire people to do this like he did? But I don't think that listening to Dirty John is going to turn people into Dirty John any more than The Silence of the Lambs is going to turn you into a cannibal psychiatrist.
Well, it's almost like it would be difficult to even duplicate unless you had this crazy personality. One part in the podcast, the part that to me was the scariest, or gave me the scariest picture, was the interview between the lawyer that was trying to do the post-nump.
Oh yeah,
And his description, John Jallo.
Yeah.
His description of John Meehan alone, just with the black eyes and the seething anger, and I was literally like starting to breathe heavy listening to that part. It was so intensely scary.
Yeah, he wasn't the only one who had that reaction to him. This investigator I talked to, Dennis Lucan, said he was the most dangerous, devious, deceptive guy he'd ever met. And you saw this description over and over in people who dealt with him. He really terrified people.
Yeah, and yet he could fool these women to fall in love with him, which is unbelievable.
I mean, he made a career of it, basically. Yeah. He was, a disgraced nurse anesthetist. He lost his license. He got hooked on drugs. Mm-hmm. This kind of became his career. He played a numbers game, too. He used dating sites. He used the internet. And he cast a very broad net and dated a lot of people. And, in fact, one of my students at Orange Coast College, back when I taught there, she heard the podcast and she said, "Hey, I think my mom dated this guy."
Oh my God.
And so I called her and it was true. She went on a date with him, but she was on to him after like a date, so it only lasted for one dinner. But that suggests to me that he cast a very broad net.
Yeah. So tell us about Tara Newell and what she was like. The way the story ends is just unbelievable. It's just crazy to me how she had the wherewithal to actually pull off murdering him, killing him in her own self-defense. What was she like? Because she sounds like such a quiet, soft-spoken person.
Yeah, I mean, the word people most often use to describe her is sweet, soft-spoken, non-confrontational. Mm-hmm. She's 25 at the time, I think, and had been traumatized by this. This is the most traumatic thing that had ever happened to her. But people were coming up to her and saying, "Hey, I hear you killed a guy." And so she kind of looked at the podcast as a way to set the record straight. Mm. It would not have been possible without her if she hadn't contributed her account. She was great. I mean, the first time I interviewed her on tape, actually, it was kind of a catastrophe technically for me. Because I was alone with her in her place, and I asked her if she would please put her cat away because I have bad allergies. So she puts the cat in another room, and after about an hour of talking, we're building up to the most important part of her account that involves the attack on her, and she's getting very emotional, and I need a clean copy of this. And it's just at this moment that her cat loses its mind, as if sensing her distress, starts screeching and mewling through the door. And I bring the tape back to the producer, and she says, "This is unusable. The cat is all over this. We can't edit this out." So I go back to Tara and I said, "Look, I'm new at this. I'm an amateur. Can we please do this part over?" And she said, "Yeah." So we did. Oh. So the part the account she gives is actually the second interview that I did with her, the one that you hear.
And I did notice, even in your interview with her, this second interview, she is so soft-spoken that I noticed your voice even getting softer speaking with her. Like it just brings it down to she just seems like a sweet person. And the crazy part to me is her obsession with zombies and that The Walking Dead, the shows that she would watch. Do you think that her obsession with that is what aided her in being able to pull off what she was able to, to pull it out of her?
She'll tell you this herself. I mean, she was obsessed with the show, and she watched it for survival skills. I mean, she's not a very big person, mm-hmm. And she was not a martial arts expert, mm-hmm. but she watched the show, and the lesson she got from it was when a zombie comes after you, you go for the brain. You've got to kill the brain. So that when she managed, I don't think anybody's quite sure how it happened, but her dog, when he attacks her on the rooftop, the dog goes after his legs, her dog Cash, and she happens to have on some sturdy boots because she's working at the dog grooming place that day, and she's going to clean up, and she needs the boots, and they've got good tread, and I think they helped her kick the knife out of his hand, and she grabs it and just instinctively starts defending herself. So yeah, she would say the Walking Dead gave her some survival tactics that helped her in that one moment.
Who would think? I mean, I'm always not wanting to watch that kind of stuff, and now I'm like, maybe it could be helpful. You never know. What is one question you most often get asked about the whole Dirty John story?
People want to know what I would ask him if he were alive and I could confront him, and the answer is I don't know, and I don't really think it matters because whatever I asked, he would just lie to me. That's the one thing I'm sure of. Also, if he were alive, I'm sure that I would be part of his campaign of terror and harassment, and he would try and destroy me. I also think he'd have groupies the way Richard Ramirez and Ted Bundy and those sort of guys did. The other question I get asked is, who was the Ovaltine lady? For those of you who remember the show, this woman appears in John and Deborah's house on Balboa Island. She's drinking Ovaltine, and she's got a Bible, and I think she's wearing Deborah's clothes. And there's never any real explanation for why she's there. I wasn't able really to prove anything one way or the other. My suspicion is, and this is the way they played it on the Netflix show, is that he had a hand in planting her there as a pretext to install surveillance equipment so he could watch his wife.
I'm sorry, I didn't quite get it.
That's my suspicion, but I don't think there's any proof.
Yeah, that's kind of what I thought too. But so this was about 5 years ago when the podcast first came out. Podcasts were not what they are today then. So really, you're kind of one of the original podcasters. You kind of brought it, to where it is. I'm curious, how did you get the idea at the time to present it as a podcast? Because originally it was printed in the LA Times. How did you get the idea to create a podcast?
Well, the editor at the time was Devon Maharaj, and he said, this is a good candidate for our first really ambitious podcast. And the print version actually it came out simultaneously with the podcast, and the whole idea was an experiment. It was cross-fertilization. People would read the story and be driven to the podcast, or they'd hear the podcast and they would be driven to our website, and it would cause people to subscribe and get smarter and save democracy and all those things. So that was the idea. And the podcasts at the time that were really big were Serial and S-Town. Those were really the path breakers. And so we've been looking at something to do for some time, and this seemed like a good candidate for it. And I knew nothing about podcasting. I mean, I'm a 25 years a notebook and pen guy. That's the height of technology for me as a reporter, really. I didn't know anything about podcasting, microphones, the physics of sound, how to do an interview with a microphone. I was clueless enough not to be intimidated, though. So my feeling was, why not?
And what was your reaction when Bravo wanted to turn it into a TV series and Netflix picked it up?
I mean, I'm happy if it drives people to the podcast itself, which is the product I'm responsible for, and the thing I take pride of authorship in.
Okay. Do you think that Bravo would have taken notice and picked it up if it was not a podcast?
I don't know. I've had a lot of things optioned by Hollywood, and this is the first thing that got made. I think it takes the guesswork away from it a little bit if the producers have a podcast to look at as opposed to just a story. It's a little easier for them to envision it as a show than it would be if it were just print. And you see a lot of podcasts getting made. I mean, Dirty John, I think, was one of the first. I don't think it was the first. I think there might have been one or two before that. But it was one of the first big ones. And then after that, there was Dr. Death. There have been a few of them since then. Yeah.
So before we get on to the next one, because I want to make sure that we talk about another podcast of yours, is there anything about the Dirty John story, John Meehan, that was left out of the podcast that you could share with us?
Oh, I mean, there was a lot. A lot of the stuff that he did to people, to his victims, we had to kind of summarize rather than go into detail about, because it became repetitive after a while. He did the same thing over and over and over, and we wanted to keep the focus on Deborah Newell and her family story. But after the podcast came out, I started hearing from some of his ex-girlfriends, and they would tell me these interesting stories. One woman told me he had this strange habit. We'd be eating, and he ate in a very peculiar way with his forearm, guarding his food as if it was about to be stolen from him. And it occurred to her after a while, this is probably a habit he picked up in prison. So
I think maybe there was even a scene in the Netflix series
where he's doing that?
Yeah, when he's eating tacos or something. Okay, so I really want to talk about another podcast of yours. If you have any questions about Dirty John, feel free. There's cards in the back. Emily can come around. Sometimes you think of questions as you're listening, so feel free. I promise we'll get to Dirty John questions if you have them. But I really want to talk about another podcast of yours, another successful podcast, Detective Trap. This is about an Anaheim police detective, Jaleesa Trapp. And can we hear the audio on that, please?
One morning in April 2014, Jaleesa Trapp woke before sunrise and went to her closet.
I know I probably went through at least 3 or 4 shirts. Just staring at, trying to decide what to wear.
She would have to make 1,000 calculations that day. Some of her choices would be right out of the homicide investigation manual. Some of them would be influenced by the small army of other cops who watched her work. Some would be instinctive and hard to fully explain.
I remember thinking to myself, this is just like any other interview. Don't let it get into your head.
Of course, it wasn't just any interview. Soon she would walk into a windowless 8x10 room and sit face to face with a man she had been hunting for the last month. To walk into an interrogation room was to play a character, she liked to say, and that began with the right costume.
It was a strategy and advice I got from an FBI agent when I worked sex crimes, that pink is a soft color, it's very approachable, non-threatening, and so that was something that I traditionally wore. I reached for those first, and it just didn't feel right.
At the Anaheim Police Department, where she worked, Trapp was known as a master interrogator. That depended on finding exactly the right persona for the room. Would she be a mother, a sister, a friend willing to listen?
I think part of it was there was people that told me, do you think he's even going to want to talk to you? Do you think he hates women?
One woman was dead. 3 others had vanished. Today might be the last chance to get answers about their fate. If the missing women were alive, the man in the interrogation room might reveal where they were. If they were dead, as she suspected, the man might be talked, maybe tricked, into revealing how she could bring the bodies home. Jaleesa Trapp had missing persons of her own, and she carried them on her skin, so they confronted her when she stood in the mirror, as she did now. They were represented by 4 black birds tattooed in a straight line under her collarbone. They were swallows, the bird that carries souls. She thought of each one as a kind of scar, but also a reminder of the mystery of fate that had brought her here, to this particular morning, and this particular case. For this adversary, she thought it was important to look approachable, but also to project strength.
I'm sitting here trying to decide, what do you wear when you're interviewing a serial killer?
She picked an emerald green blouse.
I wanted a color that looked good on me, but also that kind of signified a little bit of power. Emerald green just kind of seemed to hit it. I wanted him to know he was in control of that room.
Detective Trapp put it on, over the swallows, and grabbed her badge.
It was another really good one. I enjoyed listening to it, but it was also kind of hard to listen to. It was kind of scary. Give us a little background.
So Julissa Trapp is this hard-charging Anaheim homicide detective from a Mexican-American family, and we meet her as she's chasing these killers. Women have been disappearing from the streets of Santa Ana. The authorities have not been looking for them that aggressively, and then Julissa Trapp gets the case when a body turns up at a trash recycling place in Anaheim. And they begin connecting the pieces. Now, Trapp is devoutly Catholic, and her image of herself her whole life was, I'm going to be the mother of children. And she has unsuccessful IVF treatments, and this is part of her struggle, and she realizes ultimately, maybe that's not who I'm going to be. Maybe I'm not going to be a mother. Maybe I am going to be the person who finds answers for other mothers. And so that's the essence of the story.
Part of what made this story so interesting for me was not just reporting the events as they were happening, these women that were going missing and the search, but how you're able to really hone in onto the human nature and just appreciate, in this case, Julissa Trapp, and what really drove her. How you're talking about her kind of personal story is what really drove her to find these women, almost as if she had a responsibility to the mothers, because she was not able to become a mother. Have you always approached your stories like that, looking for that human sort of, that we can relate to?
Well, the more complicated the story, I think, the more important it is to find someone that your readers or your listeners can identify with, to carry them through the story. And I met her at the trial of the first defendant. His name was Stephen Gordon. The second guy has not gone on trial all these years later. I think he's sitting in the Orange County Jail. But the Stephen Gordon trial, I met her at. This has been in the news a lot. I mean, there have been a lot of stories about this, and it had been a scandal because when they caught these two defendants, they were sex offenders on probation with ankle monitors who were supposedly abducting people while their ankle monitors were on them, and that's how they caught them. They coordinated the pings with the cell phones. And so I covered the trial of the first guy, and I saw Julissa Trapp there. And what struck me immediately was the rapport that she had with these mothers, who initially had been really upset with the police because they'd been begging them to take the disappearances of their daughters seriously. And the police said, look, they'll probably turn up. They're circuit girls. They work as prostitutes. They'll probably turn up on their own. And then Trapp got into the case, and so did the Anaheim PD. And Trapp did kind of an extraordinary thing and a really risky thing, which is she told the mother, look, I'm going to find whoever did this to your daughter. She made that promise, and it's the kind of thing you see in the movies and on TV, but not so much in real life because it's a very risky thing to do. In real life, a lot of things can go sideways. You might not solve the case, and then you're left with that promise that you can't fulfill. Right. But she did it.
She was determined.
Yeah.
She seems like an amazing just force to be reckoned with.
I mean, she is. She's got this great intuitive intelligence combined with a relentless work ethic, and she's a living demonstration, I think, of how a lot of the best police work has nothing to do with the badge or with force, but everything to do with psychology. And my favorite cop shows weren't the ones about the car chases and the shootouts, but the ones that dealt with psychology. Some of you may remember Homicide on NBC. That was my favorite show for a long time. It was all about the interrogation scenes. And yeah, the climax of that series is this 13-hour interrogation in which she gets a detailed confession out of this guy.
Is it ever difficult for you in these interviews to hear like the gory details?
Oh yeah, this story particularly, this is very, very dark material. But the job in general, you know, it will darken your worldview. I mean, I've been doing it for 25 years. I was a cop reporter at the Daily Pilot, and I can remember, you know, the side of stabbings and shootings from 25 years ago in Costa Mesa, Newport, when I drive around. That's not necessarily good stuff to have in your head.
Yeah.
You know.
Okay, well, I highly encourage, if you haven't already listened to Detective Trap, to listen to it. It's intense, but it's really good. You do a great job. It's a great story, and I want to meet her. She just seems like an amazing person. I really want to get to another story that you wrote about, Framed, which is chapter 8 in this book. I'm sure that some of you have heard this story. It's a less well-known story, but equally engaging, actually unbelievable. Why don't you tell us about that story?
Framed. So this is about Kelly Peters. Kelly Peters is a PTA mom at a school in Irvine called Plaza Vista Elementary. She's the PTA president. Her daughter goes to school there. She's been volunteering there for years. She's beloved by the parents. And one day, she is summoned to the parking lot where there's a cop standing by her PT Cruiser, and there are drugs in her car. There is a bag of marijuana and some Vicodin and Percocet in her car, some of it sticking out of the back seat. And she says to the cop, "This is not mine," and she's envisioning the total ruin of her reputation. This is a felony. And nobody's ever going to trust her with their kids again, she thinks. And the cop is like, okay, whatever, everybody lies. Everybody who's caught with drugs lies. But he takes a chance. He doesn't arrest her. He says, I'm going to look into this, and if it turns out that your DNA is on the drugs, I will be back and you will be arrested. So one of the initial theories at the time that the Irvine PD has is that if the drugs were planted, the culprit might be her rival for the PTA president, and the Irvine detectives are going, man, how vicious do these PTA rivalries turn out to be in Irvine? It turned out to be even weirder than that, though. That guy had nothing to do with it. They traced the call that the tipster made that directed them to the car. And they find out the call came from the Island Hotel, not far from here. And they look at the survey, and somebody called in a very bad, obviously fake Indian accent, saying, Kelly Peters is driving erratically around the school. You got to find her, and that's what led to the car. So they trace the call. They look at surveillance footage, and it shows the person placing the call as this tall, lanky man in a nice suit, and they show it to the principal, and he says, that looks like Kent Easter. Kent Easter happens to be a high-powered lawyer. He's got an office on the 14th floor overlooking Fashion Island. He's pulling in $400,000 a year at a big-time law firm, and he's married to another lawyer, Jill Easter. And they're both highly educated, Stanford educated, Berkeley, UCLA. And for a year, they have been on the warpath at this point in the story against Kelly Peters. And the reason seems almost absurdly trivial, but their son, who I think was 6 at the time, was in an after-school program and got sort of inadvertently locked out for just a few minutes of the school. Kent Easter filed a lawsuit saying that he was the victim of severe emotional distress because of this. And so they tried to get Kelly Peters fired.
Volunteer position.
Yeah, they tried to get her ousted from the school. The school stood by her, and then almost a year to the day of this incident with the kid, the drugs appear in her car, and it turns out that Easter's DNA is on the drugs, and Ken Easter's phone is pinging near Kelly Peters' car on the night the drugs materialized there. And the case languishes, though, for about a year or more, because it turns out it's hard to make a case against two lawyers, particularly if they're married to each other. So they seize the phones, but they can't use the phones. They're hoping there are texts on them that are incriminating. They can't use the phones because of spousal privilege and lawyer-client confidentiality. So the case just drags on for a year till finally it lands on the desk of a prosecutor named Christopher Duff, who I think is running for judge now. At the time, he was with the Special Prosecution Unit, and he says, "We don't need the phones. We got the pings, and we've got the DNA." And he takes him to trial. She pleads guilty. It takes 2 trials to convict him, and then I interviewed him right up here on the patio.
Yeah, in the bamboo courtyard. Incredible.
Yeah, bamboo courtyard.
I'm so curious. I'm shocked that you got him to be interviewed. How you would think he would be so embarrassed by the whole thing that he just wanted to go away. How did you convince him to be interviewed?
I just bugged him. I mean, I saw him at the civil trial, so he's representing himself at the civil trial, where he loses badly. He's standing before a jury, basically saying, "Look, I've lost everything. Please don't clear me out completely." And I would just, follow him out of the courthouse and talk to him and bug him for an interview. And eventually he agreed to meet me up here. And, I don't think he talked to anybody about it. He hadn't talked to the media about it and was interested in contributing his perspective.
Sorry, go ahead.
Well, at the time, I don't know what he's up to now, but at the time he was kind of scratching out a living doing odd jobs. They'd taken his ability to practice law away. So he was trying to get things together. And one of the things he told me, the takeaway line for me, was I didn't think that the Irvine Police Department would put half of their agency on this. They literally put 20 detectives on this.
Wow.
Which is not something that would happen in a lot of other cities. So I think the story said something about the nature of the place that it happened in too.
Was he like, what was I thinking? Did he regret it?
I never got a good explanation for why they did it. The conversation I had with my editor at the very beginning, we were talking about what stories I should pursue, and he said, "This crazy story from Irvine, this is the one." And I said, "I don't know. Nobody really got hurt, at least physically. All that's going on in the world. Why this one?" And he said, "Look, this goes to kind of a universal anxiety, not only of being falsely accused of a crime, but also, we spend our lives building security for our family." Trying to build some status in the community, and we live in fear that we're standing on a trap door and it's going to open and we'll plunge through and we'll lose everything. And here's a weird, inexplicable story about a guy who kind of opened the trap door on his own and fell through it and lost everything. So there's a psychological mystery to it which interested us, but I don't think we ever got a good answer to. But the story's in there.
It's in there, and it's hard to put down once you start. It was crazy. In the end, Jill and Ken Easter were ordered to pay Kelly Peters $5.7 million. Do you know if she ever saw any of that?
I think she saw some of it, but not that amount. He declared bankruptcy, so there was a battle over that. And I don't know what she ultimately got, but I don't think it was that amount.
Okay. Well, you didn't hear it here, but rumor is that this Framed is being developed into a major motion picture. which may or may not be starring Julia Roberts and George Clooney. Just a hunch. Chapter 8 in the book. It's good stuff. And I just had a couple of other questions. We talked about you interviewing Kent Easter here. Where do you typically do most of your interviews?
Well, in the last 2 years, it's been a different world. There's a lot of phone interviews, but usually
Sure.
I like to do it in some setting that the source is familiar with. I mean, I like to go to people's homes. You notice something on the wall, you notice the books on their shelves. That tells you something about their personality. You notice their vanity plates. That leads to questions. Anything that gives an indication of the person you're writing about or opens the door to some questions is a good setting.
And where's the weirdest place you've ever done an interview?
Weirdest place. Probably the death row visiting room. I mean, I've been up there a few times in California and in Florida. And everybody's very polite there. These very dangerous men are on their best behavior because they're with their wives and their girlfriends and their pen pals and their kids. And everybody's very polite. They've kind of changed the arrangement. Back in '96, when I went for the first time, it was kind of open seating, so you could sit there interviewing your guy and literally rub shoulders with a guy like Richard Ramirez, who would be sitting next to you, the Night Stalker. And then they changed things around so that the last time I went, you're kind of in a cage with your guy one-on-one.
Let's talk about the Pulitzer Prize. One that you keep shying away from. But you led a team of journalists in 2000.
Well, I didn't break that story. The people who did the heavy lifting on that were Ruben Vives and Jeff Gottlieb. I came in rather late in the game.
And you shared in a Pulitzer Prize. He's so humble, like he does not want to take credit that he has a Pulitzer Prize.
Well, I didn't lead the team.
Okay, you shared with this team
Yeah.
a Pulitzer Prize for your Bell coverage in 2011. You received the prize. What does that mean for an author, a Pulitzer Prize?
I mean,
It's like the highest, right?
It's probably, it's not healthy to think about prizes. I'll tell you something that was fun for me, which was having my work spoofed on The Simpsons. That was probably that was a high for me. They did an episode called Podcast News, where what's the grandpa's name?
I don't.
Abe is his name.
My son could tell you.
So Abe's got a new girlfriend, and she disappears, and he's Kent Brockman does a podcast called Guilty Grandpa, and the Simpsons, Lisa and Marge become obsessed with podcasts. They're binging, and they've got bags under their eyes, and Marge holds up the podcast, and it says "Filthy John."
Oh, that is funny. That's good. That is good.
So that to me is one of the highlights of my life.
I will also just throw in really quick that you have twice been a Pulitzer finalist for feature writing. Your writing, on your own by yourself. Okay, and then I'm curious, what do you like better, writing stories, the written word, or podcasting?
I mean, the written word to me, I've always thought of it as the height of technology. A book is a perfect machine. You can go backwards and forwards. You can scribble in the margins. If you don't like it, you can throw it against the wall. And I've always thought of myself as a print guy, and I like to write long sentences that are lyrical with lots of clauses. And you can't really do that in podcasting. But a podcast, what you learn is there's nothing more beautiful than the human voice and the intimacy of having somebody speak to you in your ear. I think that's one of the reasons that it's very popular, is this instant connection you have with people, along with the fact that you can multitask while you're podcasting. You can bale your hay or shovel your snow or whatever it is you do while you're listening to a podcast, or work on your elliptical in a way that's very hard to do if you're reading. Yeah, they have their advantages and disadvantages, each of them. But podcasts have brought me a much bigger audience than than the written word has, and I'm a little bit ambivalent about that, but it is what it is. I'm happy to have people who are drawn to the stories.
And in terms of the news, online, print, podcasting, like where do you see the future of news?
It's no secret that it's been a dark time these last few years for newspapers. There was a study from the University of North Carolina that said like 1,300 communities now in the United States are news deserts, and this is not. This means no one's covering the city council or the school board meeting, and to me, this is a recipe for corruption and misgovernance, and so I think that's terrible. And even the towns that have a newspaper, they're kind of they're ghost papers or shadow papers. They're a husk of what they used to be. So podcasting, I think, is not going to save American newspapers, but I think it's one useful tool.
And is there anything that you're working on now that you could share with us?
I can't really talk about the stuff I'm working on, but there's always a few things that I got percolating.
Yeah, well, we're excited to hear about them. I'd like to get to your questions. Emily, can you bring those up? And then if you've thought of any really quick right now, no problem. Want to try and get to as many as we can.
Are we doing okay time-wise?
We're doing awesome.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, man. Okay.
Looks like a little stack.
Yeah, we got 10 minutes.
Thank you. Okay. Oh, we'll get through these. We're fine. Okay, my glasses are over there. Okay, first question. Should dating sites do more to vet their clients? And should the clients take more responsibility to report errant dating experiences? Thank you.
I mean, I don't know. I don't know. There are a lot of different dating sites with different protocols and criteria. I don't know.
Yeah.
I have never been on one.
Okay.
Is datingpsychos.com still up? 'Cause, that's probably worth visiting. John Meehan had multiple entries on that
Right.
page.
How many women in the audience have been victimized by a con artist, husband or boyfriend? I guess raise a hand.
Oh, man.
Wow, that's kind of a bummer to see. Okay. Any plans to investigate that doctor accused of drugging and raping multiple women in Orange County? Not familiar.
I haven't followed that story with a lot of attention, but I know our paper is.
Okay. Are there many more Dirty Johns than Dirty Janes?
Probably 10 to 1, just to judge from the emails that I get. I get all kinds of emails, and the subject line is the next Dirty John, and it's Dirty Mike, Dirty Larry, and once in a while the genders are flipped, but usually the predation goes male to female.
Okay. What was his real attraction?
John Meehan?
I'm assuming yes.
I mean, he had a lot of charm. He was a great talker, handsome guy. He looked like a cast member of Grey's Anatomy, I thought.
Mm-hmm.
If you're gonna pretend to be a doctor, it helps to look like a cast member of a doctor show. He had this natural charisma, I mean, some of the people that talked to me would say that he, people would just spontaneously hand him babies if they, were dealing with their luggage or whatever here, because he had that look of trustworthiness. I mean, if you were on a billboard running for mayor or governor, you look at him and go,
Wow.
he looks competent and trustworthy. People just,
Wow.
people are deceived by appearances.
And we want to believe the best in people, I think. We don't automatically assume the worst in someone. Did Deborah Newell ever wonder why John didn't have any money and was happy to always spend hers?
Well, I mean, he had explanations for the reason that he didn't have any clothes. His stuff had been stolen, he said, while he was in Iraq. He claimed that he was he claimed he was an anesthesiologist driving around seeing patients. He said that I take cash from my patients because they're uninsured, they pay me in cash. This is why he wasn't getting checks. So he had thought through his explanations. And at one point, I remember this from the series, he's installed these cameras, and this allows her to watch him so that when he says, I'm going to do a surgery, she looks at the camera footage and sees that he leaves for a little while and then comes back and goes to sleep. And she confronts him on it, and he has an explanation at his fingertips. He says, yeah, the patient failed a treadmill test and they canceled the surgery. So he was on his game. He had his explanations ready. At the same time, he left all of these documents kind of lying in plain sight, all these restraining orders, all of these arrest reports, things like that. He kind of left them lying around in his office at home, almost daring anybody to look at them. And I talked to one former FBI guy about that, because I couldn't understand that behavior, like why work so hard on this cover story and then be so careless leaving all of these documents around. And the FBI guy said that's part of the thrill. Part of the thrill of it is pushing the envelope and daring people to confront him.
Okay. Is it the woman's fault for such a crime? And what are the stats based on gender?
I don't know what the stats
Yeah.
that question refers to. No, I mean, this is, Deborah Newell is the victim here.
Can you give some tips for safe dating?
It helps to check people out. It helps
Yeah.
to.
Well, now we can Google people.
Yeah, you can Google people. There's a lot of stuff. A lot of stuff is available online. So, if you're curious about somebody's story, you can go online and check them out.
How can we view the podcast of Dirty John?
I mean, you can look at it as a cautionary tale. You can look at it as a.
I think they're asked. At least I'm understanding. Yeah.
Oh, how do you get it? Just Google Google Dirty John, and it'll come up.
Yeah.
It's very easy, very easy to find things like that.
I just found it on
Misunderstood the question.
on my iPhone, just in the podcast app. You just put in Dirty John, it comes up. Anywhere that you can, any podcasting app. Did you think the TV series did the podcast justice?
I would say they're different mediums, and you could appreciate the one without necessarily needing to watch the other. I think we got a great cast. I like Eric Bana a lot.
I'm scared of Eric Bana now.
Man, he's great. And, Connie Britton, Gene Smart, and Juno Temple. Mm-hmm. Terrific performances.
Yeah, I agree. How did you gain the trust of the Newell family? And thank you for your wonderful writing and storytelling.
Oh, thank you, whoever said that. I mean, a lot of my stories are online now, so you could see what it is that I do and the kind of stories I tell. And one thing I very often do now, if I'm trying to talk to somebody and I need their cooperation on a story, I tell them, look, check out my stories. You could read any of my books, listen to my podcasts, and you'll get a sense of the sort of thing I do. And I try to play fairly with people, and that very often helps.
Okay.
Okay. All right.
We have time for two more questions. Do you have comments on Amber H. and Johnny Depp? or comments?
Haven't followed that closely.
What do you think of the Peter Chadwick murder story? Sorry,
I don't know that one.
Okay.
I might, but I would need a little more. What's that one?
I'm not familiar with it
Okay.
either. I have to just acknowledge that we have a unexpected guest sitting in the back. If you would stand up, Deborah Newell. Thanks for coming, Deborah. What an honor and a total surprise. Thank you for being here. Well, that concludes our questions. I want to make sure that we have plenty of time for anyone who would like to purchase a book and have it signed by Christopher Goffard. Christopher, I'm going to ask you to make your way to the book signing table. Okay. Otherwise you may not get there. Our book signing. So the line. Sorry.
I should turn this up.
Is actually going to start in the back where Emily is, through the glass doors, and it's going to swing around, just come along the courtyard, and then you can come up to the front, purchase your book, and have your book signed. So if you'll just follow her out there, and you'll have a chance to meet Christopher and get your book signed. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming.